The first thing you'll notice is that I have turned up the gain on this clip because it is a background noise kind of recording that it was pretty soft. So the original is only this much. So I turned it up to about 16 dB, just loud enough so that I could see peaks, but without overloading. I think about 15 dB gets me quite nice. Then the next question is, what shall we do about space? And when you want to create more space around it, you're thinking, "Hey, why do I need space?" Because this is actually a mono recording. Later on, when we actually go out and record with a stereo recorder, you will be able to capture more of the space. But because this was on a phone, it comes out in mono. So I'm going to give it a bit more artificial space by putting in a reverb. Now, when you put in audio effects, you can either put them in on the track itself, or you can put it in one of these, which are the send or return tracks. When you start up your Ableton Live, you only have A and B. But if you do right click and you insert a return track, you can have all the way up to 8 return tracks. And why did I put, when I click on the return track A, the reverb is on the return track. Why do I put it on the return track? Is because I want to preserve the original sound. I want to be able to hear the original sound coming through on this original audio track, but I also want to hear the amount of reverb, and I want to be able to vary the amount of reverb. Then you may say, hey, why don't I just vary it by using the dry and wet? Well, the reason is that okay, let me show you what happens when I move this into the track itself. I'll switch off the other things I've got running. And if we just listen to the track itself, and I've got totally dry, right? Then I change to totally wet. The problem with totally wet when it's on the track itself is I don't hear any of the original sound. I still want to hear the original sound. So how do I do that? I move the reverb onto a return track instead. So now it's on return track A. And I send it. These little knobs here are A, B, C, D, and E. If we were to look at it in the vertical form, it would be easier to see. Let me move into the session view. Can you all hear me? Because you are a co-host. So you see A, B, C, D, and E. Yeah. So this is what it looks like. But here, because there's not much space, you got to remember A, B, C, D, and E. So A is the reverb. I will send more to the reverb. This starts from negative infinity and goes all the way to 0. So now I can hear both the original sound and the reverb. On the return track, I must be totally wet here. If I want less reverb, I just turn it down. Right, you can hear, right? Yeah, I can make this into a larger reverb. Let's just pull in one of the larger reverbs, like a hall reverb. Right, because this is a bit like a hall. It's like a large hall. Can you hear? Can you hear? Now you can hear how it fades out. Okay, so that gives me the space. That's just point number 1. But point number 2, I want to start putting in rhythms. And rhythms, I like to use delays. Delays give me a rhythm. The delay I'm also going to put onto the return track. So it's return track B. And I've got the delay that's happening every 2/16, meaning every 8th. So let's turn up send B. bit too much. Turn it down. Yeah, the amount of feedback is the amount to which it will keep on ringing back. 60% gives you roughly about 3 echoes. If you go up to 80%, it'll give you about 4 echoes or 5 echoes. Let's turn up the send again so you can really hear it when it fades out. Turn it up to almost 0. Yeah. It's also on a ping pong, which means it's left and right it's bouncing from left to right. Okay, so this is giving you that rhythm. When you hear any of these loud plops, that's where it's going to. Well, if it is too noisy in the rumbly part, right, you can actually switch on the filter, and you pull the filter out to here so that only the higher parts come out. Yeah, so that's if you want. But if you're doing dub techno, then you don't want a filter. You want all the rumbly parts to come out. So it's a matter of what kind of sound you want. So that's using a delay. There's also this thing called the grain delay. The grain delay is a really fun one. So delay is available in all the versions of Live, which includes the light, the free light version. Grain delay, you need to have at least intro version. So grain delay is a lot of fun. Let me turn down the delay so that you have a choice. And I'm going to pull on a grain delay into C. Okay, I have a grain delay here in C. And you look now, there's actually a grid. It's like you can actually play some 1980s Atari video game on this thing, right? Now let's turn up the amount going to C until about 0 and here. Oh.
Holy shit. That is way different. That is way different.
Yes, it's actually taken a grain of the sound and make it echo. And what happens when you do spray and frequency, if you go and read up, the spray control adds random delay time changes. And then if you have the low values will smear the signal. And then there's also a random pitch control, which will make the pitch change.
So it's like, like with a normal delay or echo, it's just the. This one, it randomizes the time of each individual repeat. So yeah, and it happens in such a cluster that it becomes like a spring, and that's what it controls. And then it also changes pitch. It alters the pitch of each individual repeat.
Yeah.
So,
So the one thing that we have put fixed is this thing, which is 4 out of 16, which means every quarter note. It echoes every quarter note, and the amount of feedback is 70%, which is about 3 or 4 echoes and 100% wet. But other than that, when you look at the y-axis, frequency, I've switched on frequency. On the x-axis, I switch on spray, which means that now this fella, when I move it, will change the difference between the spray and frequency. So you listen. I think you like that. Okay, so that's what you can do with grain delay. The last thing for rhythm is spectral time. Spectral time, okay, this is only in Live Suite. So intro users don't have it, light users don't have it, but spectral time is something else, okay? Spectral time, I actually have to read the instructions. It uses spectral analysis, and what it does is it will freeze a section of the delay. At first, I was like, why would you want to freeze the delay? Okay, this let me turn down the grain so they just hear the spectral time alone. When it freezes the delay, it basically, while the rest of the sound is running, I've put this onto the, by the way, I put it onto the track itself because I just want to let you hear what it sounds like, destroying the sound. When you put it, so I'll turn it to about 80%, so you still hear a little bit of the dry sound. I set it to retrigger. So it retrigger at every onset. By retriggering on the onset, this means that it will freeze the delay every time there is a loud sound, boom, a transient. And every time you hear a boom or a bing or a bang, that means somebody stepped on something or a bus went by, the delay will freeze and it will start to give you, when it freezes, it will give you an echo of every quarter note. Okay, because I've set it to quarter notes and I've set it to 75% feedback so you can hear a few runs. Then there's this thing called shift. Shift means that every time every echo goes up by 225 hertz. So the echo is actually getting higher in frequency. This makes no sense until you hear it. Okay, so every time something hits, the thing will freeze. That's with a very sensitive mode. That means every time there's a slight bump, I hear something. If I turn it down, then it won't freeze so often. Every time it freezes, it's freezing at a different frequency, right? That's why you hear different tones running. So at 70% frequency sensitivity, you can it hardly registers anything. Another way is if you want to make it really rhythmic, you go with sync and you switch on the notes thing and you make it every, let's say, if you really wanted to do it, every um, quarter note, it triggers. What it's doing is that every quarter note is freezing the spectrum and you're hearing, that's what you're hearing. So these are the different ways of creating rhythm within the soundscape that you have.